Forget the popular image of classical Athens as a serene city of lounging philosophers. The reality of Greek civic life was frantic, mandatory, and rigidly structured. Athens operated as a hyper-complex political machine designed to force its citizens into the daily grind of governing. To strip power from established elites, Athenians relied on sortition, a radical system of selecting officials by lottery. Instead of voting for wealthy candidates, average citizens were chosen at random to fill vital administrative roles, guaranteeing political power was evenly distributed. The sheer scale of this participation was staggering. On any given day, up to 6,000 citizens could be called to sit on juries and decide major legal cases. And there was no escaping accountability. Every single official had to undergo strict public audits, known as Euthynai, immediately after their term ended to prove they hadn't stolen public funds. The state even engineered legal mechanisms to prevent the hoarding of capital. Through a system called liturgies, the wealthiest citizens were legally compelled to personally finance public works. If Athens needed a new warship, a wealthy individual was forced into a triarchy, paying for the ship's maintenance and crew out of their own pocket. This is the statesman Pericles, and his views on civic duty were absolute. In his famous funeral oration, he declared that a citizen who minded his own business and avoided political life, he stated such a man was not peaceful, but rather totally useless to the state. This level of extreme egalitarian participation requires constant, exhausting effort from the average person. Hierarchies and kings are the default settings of the ancient world. So why did the Greeks feel compelled to engineer such intense, exhausting safeguards to keep power in the hands of the crowd? This marble bust shows the philosopher Aristotle, who famously claimed that man is by nature a creature of the polis, that humans are biologically destined to live in self-governing city-states. But looking deep into the Greek past reveals a very different reality. If we roll the clock back to the late Bronze Age, the mythological era of the Trojan War, the independent city-state did not exist. The Mediterranean was dominated by massive palatial economies, ruled from the top down by absolute autocratic kings known as the wanaks. These warlords controlled all trade, all bronze production, and all wealth. Somewhere between the mythical age of these all-powerful kings and the historical age of the citizen lotteries, a massive rupture occurred. Around 1200 BCE, the highly centralized Bronze Age world suffered a catastrophic systems collapse. A lethal combination of prolonged droughts, severe earthquakes, and marauding seaborne raiders shattered the agricultural surplus that kept the elites in power. The palaces fell. Look closely at this clay tablet. It is inscribed with Linear B, the complex writing system used exclusively by palace bureaucrats to track taxes and inventories. When the palaces burned, the kings vanished, and the entire written language was wiped from human memory. We can see the physical evidence of this violence today at this deep archaeological trench at Hisarlik, ancient Troy. In Layer 7A, from 1180 BCE, researchers found stockpiled resources, Mycenaean arrowheads, and evidence of a massive city-wide fire. The collapse functioned as a brutal civilizational reset button. With the trade networks severed and the urban centers reduced to ash, the survivors abandoned the ruins and scattered into isolated, highly vulnerable agrarian villages. Cut off from the global networks required to make bronze, these isolated communities had to adapt to survive. The primary unit of society shrank down to the oikos, or the self-sufficient household. Families relied entirely on their own land and labor. This corroded iron sword represents the technological shift that leveled the playing field. Unlike the copper and tin needed for bronze, iron is abundant in the Greek landscape. Local blacksmiths could forge their own tools and weapons, completely bypassing the old elite monopolies. Facing constant threats, these independent households gradually realized they could not survive alone. They began a process called synoikismus, the physical and political merging of separate villages into a single, unified community. The early polis was born. This diagram illustrates the hoplite phalanx, the tactic that shifted military emphasis from the individual to the group. Because iron was cheap,
average farmers could afford heavy armor, fighting in dense ranks where the safety of the entire line depended on every man holding his position. By the 7th century, the aristocratic cavalry was militarily obsolete. The old elites needed these armed middle-class farmers to survive on the battlefield, and that necessity gave the farmers immense political leverage. If the state expected them to form the shield wall, those men demanded a seat at the table where the laws were drafted. This new infantry class used their military leverage to break the judicial monopoly of the old noble families. They moved to end the era of gift-devouring judges, where aristocrats settled disputes behind closed doors, based on secret family traditions and personal favors. Look closely at this stone wall from Crete, inscribed with the Gorton Code. To curb the arbitrary power of the elites, Greek communities began carving their laws into stone in public spaces. The rules regarding property, inheritance, and assault were made entirely transparent and applied to all citizens equally. Through this codification, the polis itself became the ultimate, objective arbiter of justice. The authority to punish or reward was permanently transferred from the whims of aristocratic families to the collective will of the state. The lotteries, the public audits, and the forced contributions from the wealthy served a cold, practical function. They were mechanical roadblocks engineered to keep any single man from rising back to the level of a king. This stone relief shows the heavily armed soldiers of the Persian Empire. When this massive autocratic superpower invaded Greece in the 5th century BCE, it was the intense shared civic responsibility of the hoplite citizens that held the line. Free men, fighting for laws they wrote themselves, repelled a centralized empire. Following the war, Athens institutionalized this localized defense strategy into a permanent naval alliance known as the Delian League, ensuring the individual city-states could pool resources to protect their hard-won autonomy. The foundations of Western citizenship, equality before the law and mandatory participation, originated as a brutal survival strategy. When the Bronze Age palatial systems failed, collective governments became the only way for the Greek world to rebuild from the ruins.